On today's show, we'll talk undervalued middle infielders. Plus, we'll talk about differences in how you draft based on various league formats. Chris Towers of the CBS Fantasy Baseball Today podcast joins us next on Beat the Shift. And welcome to another episode of the Beat the Shift podcast. I am your somewhat under the weather host, Ariel Cohen, and with me as always, Ruvain Guy. What's up, Ruvain?
Not much. How are you doing today?
Well, better than earlier this week where I had no voice and I was sick with fever, and it's kind of cold in New York, you know. But how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Actually, it's a little bit warmer outside. I guess we got to 25, 30 degrees today, which actually, pretty high for the last couple of weeks. So, pitchers and catchers, I mentioned this last week, pitchers and catchers report, and I think start reporting next week already. And the World Baseball Classic, rosters are being announced. So there's something to keep your mind warm.
Absolutely. And so we'll continue on with baseball as it's warmer than it's been here in New York. Please bear with my voice today. Hope you enjoy the show. Anyways, I'll talk a little bit less than usual. Ruvain will talk a little bit more. And of course, our exciting guest we've got from CBS and the Fantasy Baseball Today podcast, Chris Towers. Welcome back to the show, Chris.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm perfectly happy to talk as much as you need me to. So, maybe not entirely about baseball, but we can try to keep it on topic too. And I'm from South Florida, so this cold stretch that we've been having. I live in Brooklyn now. This cold stretch we've been having is like the worst thing I've ever experienced. It's legitimately like my goddaughter was in town last week and she really wanted to walk across the Brooklyn Bridge, and I just kept trying to are we sure we want to do this? Wouldn't it be nice to take a car across the bridge instead? And nope, they really wanted to do it at sundown on Saturday when it was like 9 degrees outside.
Oh boy.
And we survived, but it was not the best time I've ever had crossing the Brooklyn Bridge. So I'm struggling with the weather a little bit, but I've avoided the illness so far. I hope you're feeling better, Ariel, in the coming days, but let's get to it.
Absolutely. And do you want to extend the congrats to you, Chris? FSWA nominated you for Best Baseball Article for this past year. Congrats.
Thank you. I was not really expecting it, so it's nice to be nominated. Always
and Ariel, weren't you nominated as well?
And yes, I was. The research article of the year.
Congrats.
Very, very good. Good luck to you guys.
Thanks. Let's both take down the hardware. It'll be announced February 25th live on Sirius XM. So keep your ears posted and join us on the show for that. Awesome. All right. Well, we're going to talk today about middle infield, but before that, our strategy section is going to be about different leagues and different formats and how you might draft differently in each. Because I know a lot of people here don't all play in the NFBC or all play in home leagues. So we do want to talk a little bit about each type of format or a lot of types of formats. And so, well, first of all, Chris, how many leagues do you play in?
It changes with every year depending on how many times I can bring myself to say no to an invite. It's usually never less than 11. And that's managed leagues. I don't, there will be a couple of, draft champions or gladiators in there, but regular fab trade leagues, it usually comes out to about around a dozen, sometimes as high as 14, sometimes as low as 11, usually not. It probably hasn't been single digits in about a decade now.
And what's your favorite format?
So I think I love the balancing act of building a team in Roto. I think that is the most interesting way to have to think about fantasy baseball, but I do think you lose something without the head-to-head component. So the head-to-head categories, I think, is the best blend of both. I think having that head-to-head component where you're going up against people and you're talking a little crap throughout the week, I think that's great. But I love having to solve the riddle of balancing a 5x5 roster.
Yeah, and I don't do as many leagues as you do. I'm more like around five, anywhere 5 to 7. This past year I actually did 7, and this past year I did for the first time. I usually don't do head to head, but I did head to head, and the head to head I did was 6 by 6, which is something I never did either.
Okay.
So sometimes just sticking your toe in the waters for a new type of format can hurt because if you have a certain amount of, and also I like the 15 team leagues if you can. I think those are the best because then you get to know the player pool the best. So it makes the 10 team leagues almost seem like a joke because you're like, oh wait, I can get this guy for this draft value. That's really cool because in a 15 I can't get him at all.
Yeah, for CBS leagues, our audience I think is primarily 10 to 12 league 10 to 12 team leagues, and so that's most of what our content focuses on. It's most of what our, when we're doing drafts throughout the preseason and all that stuff. But I'll do probably play out 2 or 3 15-team leagues, and I'll do a handful of drafts otherwise. And, it's always like, wait, it's the 10th round. Where are all the good players? Like that kind of thing. Right. Where so it is, depending on how deep the league is, it does change how you have to go about it. It also just changes the way you feel about your team. You have to remind yourself, it's a 15-team league. It's a 15-team league. You have worse players because it's a 15-team league. It's fine.
Yeah, when you look at the waiver wire, it's really crazy. And Ario, I think you started drafting in different leagues last year also.
Yeah, I'm in. I've started putting in a lot more of the non-waiver wire leagues, like the DC type leagues, and NFBC 50s have that, Raz Slam, so best ball, right? So that I again don't love playing in so many waiver wire leagues because that's the most time consuming during the year. But I do enjoy playing the draft, and so getting to know the player pool with DCs early on really helps with my drafting and auctioning. So I did a bunch. I did 3 or 4, and actually won, I think, 3 leagues last year, NFBC, from the draft and holder 50s format. And actually, Chris, we're in a league together, right? We're in head-to-head points.
The Tout Wars, right?
Tout Wars, that's right. So are you in it this year again?
Yes, I always have to remind myself. I think I'm out on labor this year because they're doing the in-person drafts this year, so I wasn't able to do that. But Tout Wars, draft in New York City, I will be there. Looking forward to it. That was a fun one. That one was interesting because we were using the CBS Sports points format, which is pretty different from ESPN, certainly. ESPN is like a full minus point for a strikeout. CBS is only half. CBS rewards volume for pitchers a lot more than anything else. Stolen bases, I think, are 2 points. But we're using roto lineups in that one. So I thought that was an interesting wrinkle because every other points league I play in is, 1 catcher, no middle infield, 1 utility, 3 outfield, 7 pitcher spots. Having to balance that with a full roto lineup was an interesting wrinkle that changes the way you have to approach it, because usually those head-to-head points leagues are the shallowest leagues I play in. You're only even drafting, I think, 256 players in a 12-team standard CBS points league. So that was a big difference.
And not only that, you get to set your lineup twice a week, which is also a wrinkle. And the winner of the previous year gets to pick the points format.
Yes. So we'll see. We'll see who, what format we have to play in this year. But
well, I know which one we're going to have to play because I'm the winner, so I get to choose it.
You
think I'm going to tell you now? I'm going to give you no time to prep.
You're going to tell us day of?
No. It'll probably be the CBS one again. But I have not decided yet. Or did I?
Keep us all on our toes.
Exactly.
All right. Well, anyways, let's talk about the league format differences, and I want to have these questions answered in terms of drafting. What changes would you differently depending upon the format? So let's open it up really basically, Chris. Between roto leagues versus head-to-head points leagues or head-to-head category leagues, how might one draft differently?
Yeah, I think the biggest distinction that you have to keep in mind with a traditional 5x5 roto versus a head-to-head points leagues, and I think, whether it's the CBS format or ESPN, which I think are the kind of 2 most prominent points leagues, at least, there's also Underdog, which is a different beast entirely, I think. But for CBS and ESPN, plate discipline matters so much in that format. And that's especially true in ESPN, where you get a full minus point for a strikeout. So, like, there have been years where Luis Arias is like a top 15 player in that format, which, you know, I have some questions about how much that reflects real life baseball, but that's the biggest thing, is that you care, you know, stolen bases in CBS, 2 points. Okay, you care about that. I think people tend to undervalue guys like Trey Turner, who get so much of their value from steals, because that still can be a big part of their game in a head-to-head points. But the biggest thing is plate discipline matters a lot. And you got to downgrade. Like, I'm kind of out on Oneil Cruz anyway this season. I don't understand his price as like a top 80 pick right now.
Every year he's terribly overpriced.
But in a points league, I'm not sure Oneil Cruz is worth drafting. Where you're only starting 3 outfielders, you lose a ton of points for strikeouts. I think, you know, that's the kind of player. But also, like, Piquet Armstrong takes a big hit in head-to-head points league. And then guys who are more doubles oriented rather than homers get a little boost in those head-to-head points leagues. So Alex Bregman, with his great plate discipline and hitting a lot of doubles but not being a huge over-the-fence power guy, those guys tend to get a big boost as well. But I think if you're talking draft strategy, head-to-head points leagues tend to be shallower. You're usually talking 9 or 10 hitter spots, usually 6 or 7, maybe 8 pitcher spots. It's much more important to have true difference makers in those formats. Those guys who are kind of accumulators that you get to the end of the season and, like, you were never excited about having Xander Bogaerts in your lineup last season. But you look up at the end of the season, I think he had 12 homers and 20 steals. That's pretty valuable, especially in like a 15-team roto context. In a head-to-head points league, that guy's probably a fringe starter at best, even with good play discipline. So I think when you're looking at the shallower head-to-head points leagues, and I think it's just generally true the shallower your league is, you're going to have a higher replacement level on the waiver wire. So getting just contributors matters a lot less in a shallower format than getting true difference makers, because you're looking for as many edges as you can get. Whereas in those 15-team leagues where you're playing 15-team roto, 2 catchers, just having guys who are out there in the lineup every week, every day, has a lot of value in a way that's not necessarily true in those shallower points leagues.
And when it comes to pitching, I think it's volume. You got to get those guys who pitch a lot, who get 5-6 innings. If you have any points for quality starts, you got to get those guys who will go that distance, who have a good team, who have a chance for possible wins. Those guys are a little bit more valuable as well. Good bullpen teams, and also good K ratios, either K to walk or whatever it may be. Mm-hmm. Because when it comes to those guys are very hard to find on the waiver wire, especially in deeper leagues, even shallower leagues. If you're going for 2-star pitchers, if you want to play the waiver wire and do that, even that's hard, because 2-star pitchers are not always the best out there. They may not go the distance, and if you're doing a weekly head-to-head points or whatever it is, those pitchers can actually sink your team if you pick wrong.
But I will say, I was looking this up earlier this week because we were having a discussion on FBT about head-to-head versus roto strategy, and I was comparing Yoshinobu Yamamoto, who had a phenomenal season last year, right? One of the best pitchers in the league. And I was looking at Zach Gallen, who was pretty bad. I think a lot of people were really disappointed. Nobody was really happy about having Zach Gallen on their team for the most part. I know he had a strong finish.
And nobody wants him now either, so.
Right. And, I mean, that's true in real life. He's unsigned. But
right.
The difference between Yoshinobu Yamamoto and Zach Gallen in a CBS points league last year was around 4 points per start. Now, that's a big deal when you're making 30 starts, right? That's 120 or so points over the course of the season. I think it's the distinction between the two of them. Maybe 135, something like that. But then when you start to think about it on a per-week basis, and really one of the biggest distinctions between head-to-head points or just any head-to-head league and roto is head-to-head is a series of 26 weekly matchups rather than your whole season. So once you start thinking about that, it's like, well, the difference between a really great pitcher and a really bad one is like 4 to 5 points per week. Now, that's a big deal, obviously, but then you have to factor in Yamamoto pitching for the Dodgers in a 6-man rotation, you're basically never getting a 2-star week out of that guy. I think he got like 3 or 4 all season last year. If Gallen gets 8 2-start weeks over the course of the season, that means there are going to be a third of the weeks of the season where he's probably going to outscore Yoshinobu Yamamoto. That's a big distinction between a head-to-head points league and a roto league, to the point where you do have to be aware of the risk of starting 2-start pitchers, but in a roto league, if you start the wrong 2-start pitchers, and this happens every year in NFBC, there are always, everybody identifies, I don't know, some low end Vicente Belozo.
Austin Gomber.
Yeah, Austin Gomber's got 2 starts away from Coors Field. I'm going to start him this week. Well,
right.
Yeah, he's still Austin Gomber. So you get 9 runs and 4 innings out of him. Well, that sticks with you the whole year. That's the nice thing about head-to-head points league, is it lets you have a very short memory. Whereas I think I started Tanner Houck in one league in both of his starts where he gave up 11 runs last year. And it's just like, that was it. I'm done. ERA is ruined forever because I started Tanner Houck for those 2 starts. So that is there's a psychological bonus to a head-to-head points league that you can move on from your mistakes a lot more quickly too.
So let me just add in a couple of thoughts that we haven't covered. In a roto league, you're concentrating on category balance.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to in a points league, you're not looking for stat balance. You're looking for more of playing the value game, right? It's a different game. Also mentioned is the head-to-head category game. See, I wouldn't want to punt in a draft strategy initially in a roto league,
yeah.
But in a head-to-head category league, that could be a viable strategy, right?
Yep.
Very different.
And it's important to note, it's really only, I don't want to say it's only viable with steals and saves, but it's a lot easier to just punt steals and saves, because those are the 2 categories that are
uncorrelated.
They're independent of everything else. Yeah, like that. Usually guys who get a lot of saves will help you in ERA, and they'll help you in WHIP, and they'll help you in strikeouts a little bit. But steals, I mean, we're all old enough to remember Billy Hamilton. That guy was a top 70 pick pretty much every year in roto leagues, just because of how hard steals were to find back then, and you had to take a big hit everywhere else because he could give you legitimately half the steals you needed to finish in 3rd place in a league. And so that is another big distinction. But in a head-to-head categories league, a Billy Hamilton type, like literally just one guy. And Chandler Simpson, I think, has a little bit more of a varied skill set. Like he should be a very good source of batting average. He could be a good source of runs if they bat him at the top of the lineup. So it's not quite the same, but that's another guy. And I think we're starting to see in the ADP where I think people are starting to back off of Chandler Simpson just a little bit, because it's in roto leagues. Part of the problem with drafting a guy like Chandler Simpson is you tend to approach the rest of your draft, well, okay, I got my steals, I don't have to worry about it. Well, there's a non-zero chance Chandler Simpson's not on the opening day roster, I think, just because he's a very poor defender. He's not a great hitter despite the batting average. So, like, if you make Chandler Simpson a big part of your team's strategy with regards to stolen bases in a roto league, you might end up screwing yourself because you're going to put all your eggs in that basket. And so in a head-to-head categories league, it's a lot easier to skip steals. It's a lot easier to punt saves. And I think there's some merit to that, because I personally, like, I hate having to talk about, like, Victor Vodnik, let alone having to have him on my team, because we know the guy's not a great pitcher. He plays for the Rockies, so even if he is a good pitcher, you're still going to have that inflated ERA, but he's probably going to be the closer for the Rockies, so he has to be relevant in a roto league because saves are so scarce. In a head-to-head points league or a head-to-head categories league too, that guy can kind of be safely ignored for at least a handful of teams.
Have you ever drafted a Rocky pitcher to start your year, ever? A starting pitcher. Ever.
Oh, I'm sure. I've been doing
Long
this.
time ago.
Yeah, I've been doing this
Ubaldo
long enough
Jimenez,
that,
and that's it?
Ubaldo Jimenez.
Mike Hampton, maybe you want to go that far back?
Brett
I mean,
Saberhagen.
Yeah, I mean,
Saberhagen.
you know, there was like Herman Marquez was pretty useful for a couple of years. I think there were a couple of good Kyle Freeland seasons.
And Herman Marquez is actually good for this discussion because he used to compile innings. He used to pitch 6-7 innings, and they kept him out there because the people in their bullpen were actually worse than him. So you just let him pitch, and that volume led to more strikeouts, led to more possibility of wins. And actually, he had probably one of the most highest values of any Rocky pitcher in recent history.
It's a real bummer they never got him out of Coors Field. I think now at this point in his career, he's probably just not all that good anyway. But it would have been fun to see Herman Marquez at his peak before all the injuries, pitching in a ballpark where we could have actually seen how good he might be, because he was a very fun pitcher.
Yep. I think the top Rockies starter I have is valued at, can anybody guess? What, in terms of auction dollar price in a 15-team league? It's Kyle Freeland, by the way, is their top pitcher.
Negative $2.
Negative $10?
You both are way off. Negative 17.
See, there you go. So, yeah.
That's their best. I didn't tell you their worst. Their worst is negative 21. Tanner Gordon.
Well, and this is it's such a bummer because you look at like Chase Dollander, and he's clearly a talented pitcher. You look at what he did over the course of his minor league career. He was posting like 34% strikeout rates in the minors. He was great. But then you look at him in a dynasty league, and it's like, well, I don't think I want that guy because he's going to be pitching half his games at Coors, and he's going to be pitching for the Rockies, which means that if there's a path to that guy figuring it out and overcoming Coors Field, I don't really have any confidence that the Rockies are going to be the team that figures that out. You know, maybe Paul DePodesta and the new front office and new coaching staff can help out and they can overcome that. But, there's just been very little reason for hope with their pitchers. And unfortunately, there hasn't been a lot of reason to be hopeful about any Rockies hitters lately, with the exception of maybe a Hunter Goodman here or there.
Ruven, want to go to you first on this question. What do you do differently drafting-wise in a waiver wire league versus, let's say, a draft champion, draft and hold type league?
Well, for a waiver wire league, I'm a little more open to taking more risk just because I know I can pick people up and everything like that. But if I'm just holding guys, and I'm gonna do a lot of darts, especially when it comes to closers. The middle relievers have more value to me there, and in a waiver wire league, when drafting, the middle relievers may not have that as much value to me. I think that when you have the waiver wire open to you, you can punt a category. You can punt actually stolen bases or saves in the draft, and you can still make it up on the waiver wire. If you're doing that in a draft and hold, you can't do that. So I think the strategy can change. I never like to punt any categories in general, but that can be a difference right there. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, when you don't, I think one of the interesting I think idiosyncrasies about the fantasy baseball world right now is that these NFC drafts that have been happening since November or late October are the first and up until a couple of weeks ago only source of ADP data that we have. And we can talk about the reasons why NFBC drafts are very different from your typical 12-team home league. No IL spots, they tend to be deeper. But a big part of it is a lot of them, especially the ones that have happened to this point in the calendar, are these draft and holds or draft champions or gladiators where you are not making in-season roster moves. So what you end up happening there is Edwin Diaz is the 30th pick and Mason Miller is the 32nd pick on average. And that is a very, very different ecosystem than what most people who play fantasy baseball are going to be experiencing in their leagues, because having that certainty of we can't predict everything, but man, it's really hard to imagine Mason Miller not being the closer for the Padres. He has to get hurt or be really bad for like a month to lose that job. And so getting that certainty in a league where you can't play the waiver wire, where you can't try to chase whichever closer emerges in Cincinnati last year before Emilio Pagan got it. That certainty matters a whole lot more in those leagues. And so that's a huge difference in a league with waiver wires versus without. But I think also just any kind of uncertainty tends to tank a player's value in these leagues where you don't have waiver wire, because a Byron Buxton type who, he's going to be great when he's on the field, but if we get 100 games out of him like we did last year, I think that was the first time since 2017 or something that he's played 100 games in a season. So or 110 plus games maybe. And so it really changes the way you have to go about building your team. There's this quote that I've been referencing a lot this offseason. It's by a guy named Alexander Chase from Pitcher List. He said, "You win your leagues by setting your lineups. You lose your drafts by valuing players as if you aren't allowed to." And I think that's great advice for a waiver wire league. But obviously these draft champions, these draft and hold leagues have a very different experience, because having reliable depth, having reliable starters just matters so much more when you don't have that waiver wire lean on, because there are always guys who come out of nowhere to be very valuable fantasy players. There's a decent chance that in a lot of draft and hold leagues last year, Geraldo Perdomo was just a non-factor, because how many people were drafting that dude? And he was a top 15 hitter. So you're missing out on those out of nowhere impact players who happen every year. We don't know who they're going to be, but there's going to be someone with an ADP outside of the top 500 who is a top 50 player this year. It happens every year.
Right. Let me jump and talk about having IL slots versus no IL slots. So, for example, I was I'm just drafting now in a league, and it's a draft champions league. So it's not that it's not an IL slot. There's just there's a big bench, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of room. But if I was to draft Zach Wheeler in an NFBC league that does not have IL slots, he would go a lot lower for me, because I don't want to have a guy who is currently injured on my roster and my bench for a while. Like Garrett Cole, to me, is almost a non-draft in a non-IL league. If you're in an IL league, then okay, you take a few dollar chance, you get Garrett Cole, Wheeler, some guy's going to sit, and then they can provide amazing ratios and stats later on. But in a non-IL league, that bench spot is too valuable. So that's one difference I have between IL and no IL. Ruvain?
Yeah, IL and no IL, big difference. And this goes along also with NFBC, non-NFBC, because NFBC has no IL, and you have to draft completely different. I don't like taking anyone who's coming into the season injured, because just like you mentioned, you have limited bench and everything like that. But if you have if your league has IL spots, or it's a home league or something like that, and you may know a little bit, you may think that you know a little bit more about an injury, or you may think you're smarter, quote unquote, than everybody else in the league, then having an IL spot and stashing a guy is more valuable, because especially if it's a 6-month league, even if it's not head to head, even if it's a 6-month league, it's a roto league, and you're going to need pitchers toward the end of the season. Those guys who you'll be stashing will be taken sometime. You don't know when they're going to be taken, but because you have the IL spot, why not? There's no reason to take them. You can just pick them with your last pick, and then you just throw on the IL and just go over the waiver wire and pick up someone else.
And Chris, can you also answer the question additionally of what the difference is in terms of drafting in a league when you have a large bench versus small bench? Sort of a little bit related.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of crossover in these two questions. And so my thoughts are going to be very, very similar for both. And I think this is another way in which, that NFC data really changes the way I think a lot of people perceive player values, because again, most people who are playing fantasy baseball are playing 10 or 12 team leagues. A lot of them are head to head, whereas, a lot of these drafts, even the ones with IL or with waiver wire, you're talking about 15 team leagues. You're talking about 5 or 6 person benches, whatever the exact number is. You're going a lot deeper in the player pool, so the replacement level, the deeper your lineups and benches are, the worse the replacement level player is going to be, and that I think plays a big part in why you see in NFC drafts, Yordan Alvarez. His ADP is down to 44.5. He's missed since the start of January. He obviously has missed a ton of time over the years. He's a big injury risk. I think we can all agree on that. But that matters a lot more in a deeper league where your replacement level player is, the best bat on your bench might be, I don't know, whenever Luis Rengifo signs or a Tyler Freeman or something. Like there's just not going to be, there's going to be Jake Myers on your bench, on your waiver wire to replace him if you miss out or if Yordan misses time. But in your 12-team leagues where you have IL spots, I think some of that logic that people apply to 15-team leagues can bleed over in a way that makes people undervalue a Yordan Alvarez, because if I get 120 games out of Yordan Alvarez, I'm very confident he's going to be a first-round caliber player when he's on the field. But in a 15-team league with no IL spots, those 40 or so games he might miss or more, they can be really hard to overcome. In a 12-team league, you're going to have a decent player that you can plug in there for those 40 games. And so you're not just getting what Yordan Alvarez gives you, which, in 120 games might be 30 homers, 80 runs, 80 steals, and a .310 batting average. But you're also getting on top of that whatever, Isaac Collins or Zach McKinstry or Jeff McNeil, just to, looking at ADP of guys around 350. Those guys will probably be available on the waiver wire, or that type of player. Those are not great, but they're not going to kill you for whatever time Yordan misses. So I think that's a big distinction between just shallow versus deep leagues. I think is the best way to think about it. Whether it's they're deeper because they're 15-team leagues or because they have deeper benches or whatever you have. You can play around a little more with risk, and I think you should be more open to risk in it the shallower the league goes.
Let me just give you a mathematical thing here for people who are playing in auctions. Here's a pro auction tip. If you're in a shallow 10, 12-team league, you want to buy players always, in general, who have full playing time in your auction. You don't want partial players. Mm-hmm. But in a 10, 12-team league, that level is all the way at your bench. Like all the starters that are taken for $1 or more, they all have full playing time. Mm-hmm. And even bench players have that. So you can afford to have more $1 picks in an auction with 10 or 12 teams.
Absolutely.
And you can take more risk on higher valued players because they get hurt. Your replacement is still a full-time player. If you're in a 15-team mixed, then that line comes roughly the $1 mark these days in terms of hitters for a replacement level. You don't want to have that many $1 players on your team. So
active players.
Active players. Yeah, so when you're auctioning the active players. You don't want to spend that much on higher priced players because that's going to make you have more $1 players. You don't want to do that in 15-team leagues. I'm going to go a little bit deeper. If you're in a mono league, a 12-team mono league, you don't want to have, to be honest, any $1 or $2 players because that line is now closer to $3 or $4. Where below $3 or $4, you don't have full-time players. I want to actually have no 1 or 2. I want to have my last players at $3, $4 only. Just a pro auction tip from here.
That's a good point, yeah.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the difference between trading and non-trading leagues. How are you drafting slightly differently, Chris, between those two?
I don't know how much it changes my approach, except that in a non-trading league, I'm probably going to be more cognizant of prioritizing position flexibility and not drafting too many guys from the same spot. Because if I go like this year, I know I'm not alone in this. I love Ivan Herrera. I think that dude is just a freaking hitter. Like he might be, even if he doesn't gain catcher eligibility, I think he could just be a viable starting option in even 12-team leagues. I think he might be that caliber of a hitter. And so, in a league where I've already drafted my catcher and I've already filled my utility spot, if I know I can't trade, I'm probably less likely to go out and grab Ivan Herrera just because there might not be anywhere for him to play, even when he's ready, even when he gains catcher eligibility. But in a trading league, having a little extra depth on your bench that you can trade from, that's not a bad thing necessarily, because you'll have the opportunity to turn that into a better player. Now, that's not to say that you should draft a player. I think if the first thing you say when you draft a player is, oh, great, I can trade him, I think that's probably a bad approach. You see that a lot when players get signed in real life sports. They'll say, yeah, but even if it doesn't work, the contract's cheap enough that you can just trade him. It's like, well, yeah, but you still want good players. So I don't think that should be a primary motivation, but I think you can be a little more willing to take a player who doesn't necessarily fit on your team in a trading league, just because you do have that flexibility to turn that guy into an impact player at a place where you're lacking.
And I'll add in that you have to be cognizant of the statistical balance, because if you're not in a trading league, then you're not going to be able to get. If you don't want to develop surpluses of some stats. If you have all the steals, well, what are you going to do with that? You can't trade it. In a trading league, I'm going to focus more on value because I can trade from a surplus. And here's the thing about trading leagues: the highest number of people traded are the scarce commodities. What do you see traded in a trading league? People are trading for steals. People are trading for saves. So you might want to have extra of that so you can be in a trading position in a trading league. So you're going to draft a little bit differently for that. Ruve?
Which means also you're more apt to draft these one or two category players that we're just discussing. Like there's no problem if you're in a 10 or 12 team league, if you draft 4 closers, that's not necessarily a bad thing. You may, use those closers, get those saves where you need to, and then when the trade deadline comes, everyone's always looking for a closer. And if you trade 2 of them when you're already near the top of the league in saves, then you have the commodity that everyone wants, and you can fill in your other holes elsewhere.
Yep. Let's talk about if you're in a daily lineups league versus weekly lineups league, and maybe versus semi-weekly lineups. I mean, in a daily league, platoon bats are far more interesting, where people have large platoon splits, because you're going to only use them for when they bat. Kerry Carpenter, if he misses some at bats, well, you're going to get all of Kerry Carpenter's numbers plus the guy who's platooning, for you on the team. So they're worth more. And of course, I'll mention that Shohei Ohtani in a daily league, you get all his pitching stats and almost all of his hitting stats. He's easily far more valuable in a daily league. Anything to add, Chris?
Yeah, I don't know if either of you are really big fantasy football guys. Ariel, I don't think you play fantasy football, right? But back in like the early 2000s when I started playing, LaDainian Tomlinson used to be so dominant that there would be some leagues that would either do the third round reversal, or if you had the first pick, you lost your third round pick or whatever, because he was just so much more valuable than everyone else. He was catching 100 passes and scoring 30 touchdowns every year, right? In a daily league where Shohei Ohtani's one player, I almost think you have to come up with some kind of version of that just to balance out how absurdly valuable and dominant he might be. Now, we've only seen that in action, twice in his career, where either 3 times where he's got thrown 120 innings in a season. And I think 2 of the 3 were before he really leveled up as a hitter. But man, if you get the last couple of years of Shohei Ohtani when he's been a 50 homer, 300 hitter, and he gives you 130 really good innings, even if you don't get all those stats from both, because you're going to have to make that decision the day he pitches. You're probably going to start him as a pitcher. So let's say you only get 40 homers out of Shohei Ohtani, but you get 130 innings and 150 strikeouts and a 280 ERA or whatever it ends up being. Like, that is so hugely valuable. So that's a key distinction in a daily league where Ohtani just becomes effectively an extra star player, a top 30 pitcher and arguably the number 1 hitter.
And I'd actually add that if for a daily league, if you've never done it before, you should do it at least once, just because you will get to know every single platoon on every single team, and it'll help you in other leagues that you're in. It's very time consuming, and even if you can do a draft with it for a daily league, it's not as time consuming because you know what? It's a daily league. If you have daily pickups or stuff like that, you don't have to worry as much in the draft. But at the same point, you have to know that you have to be knowledgeable about the entire player pool. Platoons here, platoons there. Next guy up for closing, and jump on these guys right away because some people who are in daily leagues are really on top of it. And if they beat you to the punch, you can be screwed out just because you went on vacation for a day. So that's something. If you've never tried it once, just try it once and see if you're even made out to be in that type of league because it's very rigorous.
All right, so it's our middle infield strategy and middle infield undervalued players episode. We always start with our general player pool observations for the middle infield. To remind everybody, I talk in terms of 15-team 5x5, and my numbers are auction values or auction value equivalents. Here's what I see in the middle infield position. You've got Bobby Witt at the top, just him, period. To me, he's, if you're not drafting Shohei Ohtani, he's my number one. Just gives you that whole base, and especially in Roto. There are lots of second-round middle infield options, plentiful. There are tons of middle-round middle infield options from about $10 all the way to $25, literally at every price point pretty evenly. So you don't, in terms of strategy, I think, you don't have to force yourself for a high-value middle infielder because there are so many available with considerable value. $10 value is pretty good. So I would recommend at this position, you don't have to punt a top or a high middle infielder, but you shouldn't get two of them because there are going to be bargains later. There are going to be so many options. Don't cloud yourself. Don't block yourself from being available at every single price point. I will note that it does thin out after, say, Matt McClain. And there aren't that many options below like a $5 middle infielder. So you want to be done with middle infielders. You don't want to go to the $1 or $2 ones. You want to be done. So the best price distribution for me would be something like an $8 one, a $10 one, and maybe another $10 one, or get that second round if that really fits. Chris, anything different? Do you agree? Anything to add?
Yeah, I think when you're looking at middle infield as a whole, what I like about that combination is you have shortstop has just a ton of high-end depth, right? Like there are 15 or more, pretty impactful shortstops out there. And certainly, the top 10 or 12, I think, are really exceptional players. And second base doesn't have nearly the proven bankable impact that those guys have. You have Jazz Chisholm if he can stay healthy, and Ketel Marte if he can stay healthy, and depending on how you view Bryce Terang and the power breakout that we saw from him. But what second base does have is, one, a lot of speed, which makes guys valuable throughout the draft, but it also it's got a lot of useful, not necessarily great players, but I think decent low-end starters. Like, Jorge Polanco right now is 16th in the second base ADP on NFBC right now, 229 ADP. I don't know what the auction value version of that would be, but I think that's great. If I end up with Jorge Polanco as my starter, even in a 12-team league, I think I'm going to feel okay about that at second base. I'll have to get my speed somewhere else. There's injury risk. So it's more in a 12-team league because I know the replacement level will be there, but I do think second base has a surprising amount of usable depth, whereas shortstop, it does feel, you don't need to push one of those first or second round shortstops, but if you are too blasé about getting your shortstop, I do think ending up with, let's say, Jacob Wilson as your starting shortstop, even in a 15-team league, I don't feel good about that. I think that puts me at a severe disadvantage given how good most of the rest of the league's shortstops are going to be. And, you can look at it and say, well, okay, Jacob Wilson's 16th in ADP. So, even in a 15-team league, everybody's going to get one of the guys ahead of him. someone's going to draft a shortstop as their middle infielder. Multiple people are going to do that. Someone's going to draft, multiple people are going to have shortstop as their utility. So you might reach a point where you're thinking, I'm going to take advantage of the depth at shortstop and wait, and then find yourself facing a situation, whoops, now Jacob Wilson's my starting shortstop. That's not a spot I necessarily want to be in.
In a 15-team league, I'm going to disagree. I have no
Okay.
problem with Jacob Wilson being my starting shortstop. Because if I'm valuing positions, I'm fine with having a deficiency there. And I'm valuing Jacob Wilson. ATC has him as a $16 middle infielder.
Okay.
12th round guy.
Might just be a difference of evaluation there. I
It's
think
the
he's
format.
Luis,
In a-
I think
in a
he's Luis
10
Arias, you know?
I mean, he's not Luis Arias. He had 13 homers last year. But I get your point. I mean, I don't love that makeup to be my guy, but just in terms of value, I'm okay with that.
Well,
Sure.
what I see though is that when I'm going to combine what both you guys said. In second base, there's a bigger drop off in talent. So if you're going to spend the money, you could spend the draft capital more at second base as opposed to shortstop. Because let's say you do get the top second or first or second baseman, there's a significant drop in value when it comes to the second baseman. In shortstop, you don't have that. There is more of a waterfall value going on there. So you're not going to lose as much value if you wait a little bit longer in shortstop. And to mention what Ariel mentioned, there are 39 players according to ATC. There are 39 middle infielders who have a value of $10 or more. So, even if you don't get the top guy and you get you mentioned Jacob Wilson, if you get him, you're getting a $15 guy. That's fine. You can actually allocate your money to the outfield, which is going much more expensive.
Yeah, I see shortstop as the deepest position, and because it's the deepest position, I don't need to actually get anything there. I want to concentrate more my early picks away from middle infield. If there's an outstanding value in the middle infield, I'll pounce on it. I mean, we got Trey Turner in an auction the other day, and that was just a great value. I mean, he's a second-round player. We got him way cheaper. But in general, I don't feel I need to do that because of just the level of depth. Now, you do have to be careful with Jacob Wilson because one thing I will say, and I think Ruvain will confirm, I think you need stolen bases from the middle infield. That's something where you got to get your stolen bases. So to roster Jacob Wilson, you got to have stolen bases elsewhere. But if you do, I've got no problem with him.
And that's something that I think is worth keeping in mind, not just with Jacob Wilson, but with Jacob Wilson type players, these kind of extreme players, I guess is the way I would put it. And you can go as high end as I would say this about Kyle Schwarber, who is an awesome player. I love him. I'm fine with him, I think, as a second round pick, although it makes me a little queasy. And the reason for that is precisely what you said about the category balance. And it's the way that these kinds of players who have real strengths, but also real deficiencies. In Kyle Schwarber's case, I think the batting average, the last couple of years, it's been good enough that you can live with it. But if we get one of those 220 seasons, I think it changes the way you have to go through the rest of your draft or the rest of your auction. When you've got Jacob Wilson, well, it kind of puts you in a spot where, can I really focus on another non-source of stolen bases? From your first baseman, sure. From your second baseman, probably not. You probably need to get some steals from your second baseman. You need to get more steals from your outfield if you have Jacob Wilson as your starter. So those kind of extreme players, with the extreme category deficiencies and strengths, they make your path through the rest of your draft a little hairier in a way that is overcomable, but is, it does make me feel a little, I don't know, itchy as I'm going through the draft when I have them.
Yeah, so not to belabor the point too much, but that's why you will see guys like Wilson and especially Luis Arias, who we'll talk about a little later, they're going way cheaper than their overall roto values suggest, and that's because it's harder to build a balanced roto team with them, right? It's when you're building snake drafts, it's a building exercise. I got to get some of this stat. I got to get some of this stat. It's harder to build your team around those more one-dimensional guys, and Arias is as a batting average guy. So they will naturally go later and at a, quote, cheaper, undervalued price. Different in an auction, though. Auction, they should be going a little bit higher because it's easier to fill in the gaps because you can jump levels.
You're
You don't
more in
have to
control.
But the issue that people run into when you draft, like say a Kyle Schwarber or something like that, it changes your mindset for the whole draft. You say, okay, I'm pretty set of power. I'm going to go concentrate on batting average. Or I'm going to go concentrate on stolen bases. Whatever happened, just getting those 15-15 guys or those 20-20 guys. This way you don't have to worry about, okay, if Kyle Schwarber gets hurt, my power is sunk. Like last year, Anthony Santander, how many people banked on 40 home runs from him? And then you don't have him anymore. And you're saying, oh, during the draft, your whole draft strategy changes because, oh, I don't need power. I have Anthony Santander. No, you don't. You didn't have Anthony Santander, and that's the problem that comes into. And that's why a player like Jacob Wilson, even though he's not a sexy name when it comes to like a whole bunch of a whole bunch of categories, he'll still give you enough that'll keep you afloat, that you can fill in this everything else everywhere with other players and make your team more even spread out.
One quick point. I think that does highlight the kind of limitations of that all-in-one, roto dollar value or roto score, because a player like Jacob Wilson has more value on the team that has Kyle Schwarber than the team that has Trey Turner, let's say, to pick another player from that range, just because. So that it's that all-in-one number. I value it. I use it for my own valuations and all that, but it is worth keeping in mind that, to win the batting average category, you only need 1/1000th of a point more than the second place guy. And if you win batting average by 10 points, you probably wasted a lot of production that should have gone elsewhere. So that's the one other thing that I would want to say there.
So I do want to get into some players, and as our custom on this show, we don't talk about everybody at the position. We talk just the ATC undervalued players, focus on them, and we don't take it for granted. We talk a little bit about them. So we're gonna go a little bit faster than usual here, as we're running a little bit long. But let's get to a bunch of them. Let's do them in pairs here. Jeremy Pena and Bryce Terang. These are $22-ish type players that ATC is showing with a $3, $4, $5 bargain. I mean, Jeremy Pena was awesome last year, and that was despite actually having rib and oblique injuries in the season. He had just under 500 at-bats, and he earned $20 of roto value. I mean, if he's healthy, and I don't know if injury is really a concern, but he's batting on the top of that lineup. He's phenomenal and gets you in every single roto category. I mean, he should be able to go near 2020. $5 bargain for him in the 7th round. Sounds great to me. Bryce Terang is coming up as a small bargain. Again, he's one removed from a 50 stolen base season. I don't like him as much as Pena, but to get an undervalued stolen base guy early on, not terrible. I won't be drafting Bryce Terang in the 5th round because I have other things to do at that time, but he is going as a small value. Chris, any thoughts on the two?
I think Terang is so fascinating because you have this real power breakout that he had last season, right? The average exit velocity jumped 4.1 miles per hour. The bat speed, he was one of the biggest bat speed gainers. That jumped 4.5 miles per hour. The quality of contact, the expected WOBA on contact goes from 328 to 395. Everything about the breakout that he had last season as a hitter looks real. And the one thing I can't get around mentally is here are his home runs by month. 2, 1, 1, 1, 10, 2. So it's like I tend to think that the full season numbers are more predictive than any specific slice. Like if you want to, it's almost always a bad idea to try to say, but from June 17th on, he was X player. I think you're going to have a better time using the full sample size. But in his case, I just don't know what to make of 18 homer season with 10 homers coming in August. But the underlying data suggests that the power was real. So I've really struggled with that one, but I tend to be mostly in on Terang just because I do think there's a path to, if we get the 2025 season as a hitter and anything like the 2024 season as a base stealer, when he stole 50, if we get what he did in 2025, but he steals 38 bases instead of 24, I mean, that might be a first-round player.
Right, and for Bryce Terang, his hard hit rate last year was 47.5, which is actually really high. If you look at the players who are going around him right now in ADP, you got C.J. Abrams, you got Roman Anthony. I mean, if you want to get stolen bases, you could go with C.J. Abrams and hope his power is for real. You can go with Bryce Terang and hope his power is for real.
I'll take Terang.
You know, there's your answer. So if they're going around the same spot and you want to pick one of those two guys, I guess that'd be the deal breaker. And with Jeremy Pena, he only played 125 games last year and went 17-20. That's crazy. Rib fracture, I think he'll be perfectly fine. You saw how Aaron Judge recovered from his rib fracture, so I don't think that's going to be an issue. And the oblique injury goes along with the rib fracture because it was probably quote unquote babying it a little bit, so he probably his the way he was playing may have been a little swinging, may have been a little bit different. That's probably why he got the oblique injury going on later on in the season. So I don't think there's much to not like about Jeremy Pena, and I love his value where he is, and I like it much better obviously than Bryce Terang.
A quick thing on Trevor Story, who's undervalued by ATC by a few bucks. Trevor Story, we know what his skill set is. We don't know if he can stay on the field. Can he repeat at the age of 33, 612 at-bats? I'm going to take the under on that. ATC is projecting 545 at-bats, and that's a bargain compared to the market. Chris, is that somebody that you're going to be buying, Trevor Story? Because, it's really just binary risk. Is he healthy or not?
I mostly think it comes down to if he's healthy, but I do think there's some inherent fragility to the skill set. You're not talking about a guy who puts up, like, outrageously great quality of contact metrics, his plate discipline, a worse than a 5-to-1 K to walk ratio last season is pretty scary. So I do think there is the potential for Trevor Story to stay healthy but just not be very good, or at least be a significant detriment in batting average. I think his batting average range is pretty low. He could hit 225, 230, and I really wouldn't be surprised. So I think there's some performance risk, but I think you're going to get 20/20 out of him if he stays healthy. I think he's okay. He's definitely not a priority target for me, Trevor Story.
Yeah, very high K rate. Could be a 30% K rate. Yeah.
And the last time he played 157 games was in 2018. I mean, he's going around pick 100 or 102 right now. You have Byron Buxton going at 75. Who's going to have more at-bats next year? Who's going to have more value next year? I think I'll be willing to, risk the Trevor Story at where he's going as opposed to someone like Byron Buxton, even though they both have almost similar injury trajectories.
All right. Before we go on, time for the Injury Gurus Trivia of the Week.
So this week's trivia is going to be based on the next player we're going to discuss. So obviously that's going to be one of the answers. So Chris, it's a little cheating, so you'll know the answer, one of the answers for this. But according to StatCast last year, can you name the top 6 players with the highest average launch angle last year?
Oh, wow.
How are we doing Family Feud style rules? I'm going to say
we can do Family Feud. Chris, you can go first.
I'm going to say Mike Trout.
Mike Trout was not on the list.
Okay, he might have
X.
Yeah. Okay.
Ariel, any guesses?
I you know what? I don't actually know high launch angles at all. I just have a blank.
Okay, so the highest launch angle last year for any player was Cal Raleigh.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah. That's the obvious one.
Yeah, he had that 40% pulled air rate, so yeah, it had to be high.
Number 2 on the list was Spencer Torkelson. Number 3, Miguel Vargas. Number 4, the recently signed Eugenio Suarez. Number 5, Kyle Manzardo. And number 6 is the guy we're going to talk about next, and that's Willy Adames. Now, just for if people were wondering, Kyle Schwarber was 8th, and Aaron Judge was 11th in launch.
Yeah, I should have guessed one just to guess somebody.
Think of the power guys, but that's it. But I want to bring it up because of what Willy Adames can bring. He's only missed 3 games over the last 2 years. Sometimes the best ability is availability. I know it's a trivial thing to say, but it's not really. He's hit 30 home runs in the last 2 years with a total of 33 stolen bases. He had a career high in barrel percentage, his launch angle, and launch angle, like I mentioned. He's going to be in a better lineup with a full year of Devers there. Luis Arraez hitting ahead of him. So with all these things and with that launch angle, I know he doesn't play in a great hitter's ballpark, but the fact that he has a better lineup, you can get more RBIs, and I'm actually pretty high in Willy Adames this year. Chris, what do you think?
Here's a little bit of trivia. Do you know the last player on the Giants to hit 30 homers in a season before Willy Adames?
It's not Bonds, is it?
It is Barry Bonds.
It is Barry Bonds. It is Barry Bonds. I remember talking about that with Devers because he hit 30, but not all with the Giants.
Yeah, but his Rafael Devers was on a 37 homer pace after the trade. I think people are overlooking that a little bit because of the park. But I do think Adames is, in a 12-team league, definitely a fallback option at shortstop, but that's mostly just because the batting average is probably going to be pretty bad. You know, the best batting average he's had in the past 4 seasons is 251 in 2024. So we have a 238, a 217, and then last year's 225. I think, you know, you feel pretty good about getting close to, if not just at 30 homers like he did last season, but there are going to be downsides to that. He's going to steal a decent number of bases, but probably, you know, in the low teens. You're going to get a decent amount of runs and decent amount of RBI. He's going to be a good contributor there, and you're going to get power, but it is baking in a pretty rough batting average, I think. So that's the one limitation that he has on his profile. Otherwise, I think he's very good and a perfectly fine fallback option if you can stomach the batting average.
I mean, my argument for him is really simple. It's value. He's going for $12 and he's worth $19. $7 bargain in the mid rounds. I mean, it's the percentage chance that you're going to make money on him is high, and he's a many paths to value. Sure, batting average will be low, but he's got value everywhere. He's had 90 or more runs in the last 2 years. He has had 80 or more RBIs in the last 4 years. He's had over 24 homers in the last 5 straight years. So the path to value is great, and the potential bargain is there. So Willy Adames, to me, is an absolute yes for value. Next couple to talk about is Dansby Swanson, Ezekiel Tovar. Swanson, I've always loved, just a high floor person. Not going to hit more than like 240, but again, he's going to give you the same kind of distribution like Adames, 20 homers, 15 steals type of thing or more. Ezekiel Tovar, he's actually I'm very optimistic on. I just passed last year as completely injury, and he plays in Colorado, and he's going to get stats all across the board, and he's going to hit for a decent average. If you chalk up injury to last year, he's an $18 player going for about $8, one of the highest bargains available according to ATC projections. Again, it's hard for me to see that this guy won't earn the value if healthy, and he's going to play all the time because he's a very good defender. So those are my arguments. Ruven, go to you first. Swanson and Tovar.
Well, Swanson, I can make the same argument that I did for Willy Adames. Swanson played 159 games last year, so he's playing every day. His hard hit percentage last year was almost 48%. That was 35th overall in the majors, right after Julio Rodriguez and right before the aforementioned Eugenio Suarez. So there's a lot of path for value. It's a good park that he's playing in, and he's going to play every day. As for Ezekiel Tovar, I'm a little bit lukewarm on him. He had the injuries. Obviously, he only played 95 games last year, but on the road last year, he only hit 172 with 15 RBIs and 17 runs over 50 games. That is not great. I know he did have an oblique injury, so that may play into it, and maybe he was playing hurt. But in any event, if you can want to keep him on your bench and have as him lower and play when he plays in Colorado, that's fine. But I'm not as high in Tovar as you are. Chris?
I think with Ezekiel Tovar, there is a lot of inherent volatility to his profile. And I think this is true of a lot of guys with this skill set where he makes a decent amount of contact and he doesn't strike out 30% of the time necessarily, but he never walks. And I think that kind of approach, you see it with Michael Harris. You saw it with Pete Crow-Armstrong last season. I think we saw it with Yainer Diaz last year. Those free swingers who don't walk at all, and so they are entirely dependent on batting average and quality of contact on balls in play.
He is
for
in
their value.
Colorado, though, and the
Yes,
BABIP does
for
play
sure.
in Colorado. So it's
Yes.
doing that in anywhere else is awful. It's not as bad in Colorado, actually.
But those weeks where they're out of Coors Field, and especially, you have a Coors Field series Friday through Sunday, and then the next week every game is away from Coors Field. That's probably a situation where you can just look at Ezequiel Tovar and say, that's just not going to be worth having in my lineup because, one, he's just going to be inherently worse away from Coors Field, but two, that Coors hangover effect is a real thing. And if you don't know what I'm referring to, it's the first series after a series at Coors Field, hitters tend to perform worse than even their baseline road performance away from Coors Field. So I think that just in a deeper league, I think it's a little harder to stomach that, knowing that there will almost certainly be long stretches where Ezequiel Tovar just isn't useful. And that's true of every player, right? Inconsistency, we talk about certain players being consistent or inconsistent. I think that's very hard to predict. Tovar is a case where I think there's just an inherent predictable inconsistency to his production that you have to manage. But if we get to the end of the season and it's 20 homers and 8 steals and, a 250-ish batting average, that'll probably be pretty useful, yeah.
All right, next two players, Gleyber Torres, who's going for $5 and he's worth 15 according to ATC. Wow. Xander Bogaerts, who is worth $14. He's actually going higher than he was before, and it might be partially because I mentioned him on the NFBC auction podcast. His AAV actually doubled since I went on the show and mentioned him. I'm going to chalk that up to me. But anyways, I'll let Chris go first, but I do want to mention that between the two, you mentioned earlier, Bogaerts way better in Roto than in points, and the opposite is true for Torres. Torres is a better points player than he is Roto.
Absolutely. I think Torres is pretty fringy in points. He's not bad, but he doesn't really have any strengths. It's kind of like B- to C+ production across the board, like 250-ish batting average. Well, it doesn't kill you, but you're not happy about it. Mid-teens homers, again, it doesn't kill you, but you're not thrilled about it. He doesn't really steal bases anymore. And the one thing with Gleyber Torres that I think people might talk themselves into is he had a 363 xWOBA last season, 332 WOBA. Well, yeah, but he's playing at Comerica Park, not Yankee Stadium now. And so I'm not saying he's going to underperform his expected WOBA by 30 points every year, but this is a guy with a very good plate discipline profile, but he doesn't really hit the ball very hard. He doesn't hit the ball, to the pull side in the air in a way that would help him overcome kind of average-ish quality of contact. So I do think taking the numbers at face value with Gleyber Torres makes a lot more sense than the underlying data suggesting that, there's a lot of room to grow. I think what he is fine. I just, in a 12-team league especially, he's unlikely to be anything more than fine. I think he's probably a better pick in a 15-team league.
Yes, no, I agree with that. The other thing I'll add, well, first of all, 16% strikeout rate last year. That's phenomenal. In a 5x5 Roto, his runs and RBIs are way, way outsized at that point in the draft than anybody else. And people forget runs and RBIs are 40% of your offensive production. And it's not like he's a zero in homers. He's getting you, high teens in homers. He's getting you 255 passable batting average. So he's middling in the other categories, but he's actually a very big positive. In terms of Z-score, he's a plus 0.7 in runs. That's phenomenal for a $4 player. People forget that there. But I agree, though. It's a 15-team, not 12. What about you, Ruvain?
Well, the best thing I'd say about both of those guys, both him and Xander Bogaerts, they're both serviceable. You know what you're going to get. They're not they're not going to break out. They're past the stage of breaking out. You know you're going to get 15 from Bogaerts maybe. You know you can get 15 2, 3, 4, 5 from Torres. Gleyber Torres' home run to fly ball rate was under 10%. If that goes up a little bit, you may see a little bit more home runs. And the last 2 years for Xander Bogaerts at Petco Park, his home run to fly ball rate was actually very low also. People see that how many stolen bases he had last year, and he's had 52 stolen bases over the last 3 years. He is getting older, so you can't really say, okay, I'm getting Xander Bogaerts, I'm definitely going to have those 20 stolen bases. You're probably not. You're probably going to have closer to a 15-15, like I mentioned. So you have to know that you're not buying these two guys for their names anymore. You're not buying them for their upside. You're buying them to be serviceable middle infielder guys when you missed out on the top guys. I think that's what it comes down to.
All right, so here's some 15-team undervalued players at the bottom. Tell me if you like any of those guys. Mason Wynn, Andres Jimenez. I just want to point out that I went to Toronto for a ball game this year, and it was Andres Jimenez bobblehead day, and we got a couple of bobbleheads, and he hit a home run, and he was so close to getting the winning hit in the World Series. So we're rooting for a guy who grew up with the Mets, Andres Jimenez. He was pretty awful last year. Any interest in those for rebound or Mason Wynn for possible 15-15 potential? We're talking like 18th, 20th round players now.
I really want to like Mason Wynn. I tend to give a little bit of benefit of the doubt to these really, really elite defenders that they will figure it out offensively. And this is not like an analytics thing. This is definitely more of an eye test or a gut thing where, you know, the Picor Armstrong types and Ceddanne Rafaelas, where, yeah, there are real flaws and limitations in their games, but there's just a real baseball skill set there. And I think Mason Wynn, arguably the best defensive shortstop in baseball, I think there's something there. There's clearly athleticism. There, you look at the minor league number. There was very good bat to ball skills. There was very good stolen base skills. There was a little bit of pop. We haven't really seen much of that at the major league level. He's a decent contact hitter, but he hits the ball with so little authority that it doesn't really matter. I think if Mason Wynn, he played through a torn meniscus in his knee last season. He had surgery in the offseason. He talks every offseason about stealing a bunch of bases. And I think the whole profile works better if he's a 30 steal guy, because I think he could be a really good source of batting average. I could see a world where Mason Wynn optimizes his approach as a hitter, starts hitting more line drives, starts hitting the ball in the air to the pull side with a little bit more authority. And I could see like when Tim Anderson was really good, right? When he was a batting average standout. Maybe Mason Wynn is more of like a 275, 280 guy at the high end, but if he started stealing bases the way he's talked the last two off seasons, I could get very excited about Mason Wynn. So as a very deep sleeper, I think there's some appeal there. He's a guy who's going to be in the lineup every single day because he is such an impactful defender. I mean, truly, maybe the best middle infield defender in baseball. So in a 12-team league, I think Mason Wynn is pretty easy to ignore. But in a 15-team league, you could end up with a 15-20 outcome from him. He certainly has the athleticism for it. It's just a question of whether he ever turns that into production on the bases.
All right, so Mason Wynn, I'm a little worried about because of the fact of what the Cardinals have done to their lineup. Right now, according to roster resources, they have Mason Wynn batting 5th. He is not a number 5 hitter, okay? That lineup, if you look at that lineup, that is not really a lineup that stands out and says, oh, yeah, we're going to compete for the NL Central. I just where he's playing, he's the youngest guy on the list that we've mentioned so far. So I'm a little bit concerned and I want to know, I'm not really sure what the Cardinals think they're going to get from him. Do they want him to be the stolen base guy? Do they want him to be the power guy? So, he's going really cheap. So if you want a little upside guy, that's fine. And you mentioned Andres Jimenez. He only played 101 games last year, and he has 1730 upside. I think that's the possible upside. He had a quad injury the first half, ankle injury the second half. He played well in the postseason. He played 87 games in second base last year, but he's right now, I think, the starting shortstop in Toronto. If he's a starting shortstop in Toronto in that lineup, yes, he's going to bat 9th, but going around pick 335, that's definitely a dart that I'm willing to take, especially a guy who has possible speed and a guy who's playing in a good lineup.
Yeah, I think we actually drafted both Wynn and Jimenez for cheap in our
Yes, we
in
did.
our auction.
We did.
Yeah.
We did.
We got him like for $2 and $4 or something like that.
Yeah,
Again,
that seems
15-team
fine.
league.
Yeah, that's fine.
15-team league to get those guys for $6. That's not so bad.
Yes.
All right, Chris. Any other middle infielders, maybe even deeper, to talk about that pop into your brain?
Deeper. Okay. I do think. Well, I guess we should mention all the prospects, right? J.J. Weatherholt, Kevin McGonigal, Connor Griffin. There are questions about whether those guys are going to be on the opening day roster. My guess is at least two of them are. I think Kevin McGonigal is probably the least likely of the three, and Weatherholt probably the most likely. So worth mentioning them, but they're in a 15-team league. They're all kind of being drafted at least as middle infield starters at this point. I want to throw out Aiden Miller for the Phillies, another prospect who probably won't start on opening day, but if Bryson Stott falters, I think, or if there's an injury to either him or Trey Turner, and obviously Turner misses a lot of time, Aiden Miller for the Phillies could get the call. Colt Emerson is another guy for the Mariners who could be a part of their opening day plans. So that's another one to keep in mind. I think there's a non-zero chance Colt Emerson starting, at third base or second base for the Mariners. And let's see, I like, we'll mention another prospect, Jet Williams, who got traded to the Brewers recently from the Mets. I don't love his profile. I think he's kind of Caleb Durbin-y, but if he gets playing time, Milwaukee's a good place to hit. It's a great lineup. He's got some speed, so I do think Jet Williams could matter. I'm still pretty interested in Christian Moore. I'm still pretty interested in Christian Campbell. I know both of their rookie seasons did not go the way anybody expected them to, but I think there's some pop with Christian Moore and maybe some speed. And Christian Campbell, I don't know what the Red Sox plans are for him. He's kind of been the forgotten guy in a lot of the discussions about Boston this offseason, but they've already given him the long-term extension. So I don't think he's just going to go away forever. There's been some talk. We had Jen McCaffrey, who covers the Red Sox for The Athletic, on the podcast a couple weeks ago. She said they're having him focus on the outfield, and then, they'll probably work him into second base as well. But Christian Campbell still has a chance to break camp with the Red Sox if he has a good spring. So don't forget about him as well. And I will throw Bryce Matthews is a guy that I remain very interested in. I don't know how good he actually is, but I think for the Astros, he's put up big numbers in the minors, and there could be an opportunity there for him at second base, maybe in the outfield. And then a little bit of a blast from the past name here, but Edward Julian used to have a lot of hype in fantasy circles, and that's gone away for good reason. He can't really hit lefties. He does not hit the ball to the pull side, so whatever power is there is pretty limited, but he got traded to the Rockies. He's probably going to play at least every day against righties, and if he's a 240 hitter or a 230 hitter in true value, well, he might hit 250 or 260 playing half his games at Coors Field. There's a little bit of pop there as well. So I think Edward Julian is definitely a name to keep in mind deeper in drafts.
Yeah.
Very, very deep.
I had him on my list. I'll throw out two quick names. Colt Keith, I think there's some upside there. And I'd say Cody Clemens. And he's got corner, middle, and outfield eligibility in NFBC, I know at least. So that's interesting. You never know. Ruben?
Yeah, I got a couple of oldies, but I'd say goodies. J.P. Crawford, he seems to get value every year. Nobody values him, and he's basically the everyday shortstop in Seattle, which is not a bad lineup. I'm looking at Ernie Clement. If he can have any sort of the batting average continuation carryover from last year, he earned $9 last year, and he's going for like an ADP equivalent of 1 right now. That's someone I'm willing to take, especially if you want a batting average guy late. Jake Cronenworth, he's everything he's done and everything like that. But he earned $6 last year, so I don't think he's done. And if you need a middle infield guy, he's not the worst guy to have. And And also, you always have to look for these guys. You mentioned Jeff McNeil before. Some of these guys, you have to look later down in the middle infield. There's so many guys who have multiple position eligibility, and this is where you have to look for this. And this is where the multiple position eligibility is the most valuable. Middle infield, because you got second base, outfield. You have like a Jeff McNeil type. You have first base, second base. You have a guy like Brooks Lee, who was and maybe is still a prospect from Minnesota. He can play all the middle infield positions as well as third base. There are all these guys that this is the place where you can dabble, you can take a risk here and there, put them on your roster, have them at the end, and have them plug in because they're not going to kill you for a week or two.
Like I said, by the number of names you're hearing late, again, you don't have to force yourself by getting a top middle infielder. I just think that there's just so many options that you don't force yourself. You'll get a bargain. Somebody, when you have a pocket of 5-6 guys that are undervalued or viable lower down, it's a hot spot. You'll get somebody at even lower down than that, right? You can wait even longer because nobody's going to sap up everybody. So, again, you don't have to force yourself. Ruvain, injury update. What are the middle infielders and how are they recovering?
Sure, we'll talk about Anthony Volpe first. He's not expected to make his season debut at least until the end of April. In mid-October, he repaired a partially torn labrum in his left shoulder. He's expected to be cleared to hit sometime this month in February, but he's not allowed to dive on the shoulder until around April. So we'll see when he's able to come back. Ha-Sung Kim of the Braves had an injury. He hurt his right middle finger. He had a torn tendon, needed surgery. He slipped and fell on ice while back home in South Korea.
He was giving somebody the finger and slipped on ice and hit the middle finger.
If that's your side of the story, that's fine. But guys who
baseball
can
players,
fill in
they're
for
just like us.
Well, yeah, they're regular people. Except
Don't
they
cut
make a lot
Ha-Sung
more
Kim
money.
off.
Except that, Mauricio Dubon, Nacho Alvarez can get some more time. But Ozzy Albies had a fractured left hamate last September. He's supposed to be fully healthy for spring training. If he had any issue with it, the only issue carryover, maybe with some power just to start off the season. Zach Geloff is a blast from a past name. He successfully underwent surgery for his left shoulder in September after dislocating it. There's no word when and if he'll be ready to start the season. And I mentioned Jeff McNeil. He had thoracic outlet surgery in the offseason. But is expected not to miss too much time. He's been doing pretty good with range of motion and everything like that. But thoracic outlet surgery is much more serious an operation for pitchers as opposed to hitters. It did affect McNeil later in the year as he wasn't able to swing. And I'm going to end with a Met. Francisco Lindor, I think I mentioned this before, but Francisco Lindor had right elbow debridement procedure in October. It was his second surgery for the elbow over the last 2 years. He had one done in 2023. He had bone spurs removed as well, but he's expected to be fully healthy when spring training starts.
All right. Well, hopefully I'll be fully healthy for next time. Thank you so much for listening to the show and bearing with my voice, but this is the best that I've actually sounded in a week. So thanks again for joining me. I do want to thank so much Chris Towers for coming on the show. Chris, can you just tell the audience where we can listen to you and see all of your work?
Yeah, Fantasy Baseball Today is everything. Fantasy Baseball Today podcast, Fantasy Baseball Today YouTube channel, Fantasy Baseball Today newsletter, cbssports.com/newsletters. That's going to be pretty much 5 days a week between now and October. So, it's a pretty good deal for free.
Other than tomorrow, because you're on this show.
Well, no, I'm gonna start writing now between this and when we record FBT.
There you go. All right, Ruben, how about you?
You can follow me on Twitter, X at MLB Injury Guru, where I'm going to tweet out injury updates as they come as players report to spring training, and you can catch my writing over at Rotobowler.
All right. Thanks again so much. I'm Ariel Cohen. My stuff over at Fangraphs, Rotographs, and Rotoballer. ATC projections up all mess of places, including Yahoo, including RotoWire, Fangraphs, all the usual stuff. Check them out. They are updated once a week through February and more than that in March to get your most updated information for your drafts. All right, once again, thank you so much to Chris Towers for coming on the show, and from all of us here at Beat the Shift, we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.